So if a commercial lease is breached, it differs significantly from usually when a residential lease is breached. Typically, after the rent's due and it hasn't been paid, that's the most typical breach that you see. And the landlord gives their notice to pay. And if the tenant fails to pay the amount when due on the notice, the landlord can sue for eviction. And typically in Florida, the tenant is required to deposit with the registry of the court any amount of unpaid rent that is not in dispute. And if the tenant fails to do that in a timely manner, the landlord is entitled to a summary eviction. So it's pretty fast and pretty quick. So it's landlord friendly in Florida from that perspective. Now, not to say that there aren't often defenses to that, but if the rent is due and it hasn't been paid, and no matter what the landlord's done, his other breaches, the tenant has to come up with that money for the registry of the court that the court says has to be paid in. Now, there are other breaches in commercial leases that occur. So for example, if the landlord's not holding up his side of the bargain as far as maintaining the premises, then depending on the way the lease is drafted, the tenant could be entitled to self-help. In other words, the tenant would pay for those repairs and then seek contribution from the landlord. And similarly, if the tenant's responsible for maintaining certain things and they fail to do so, then the landlord's entitled to get those things done and then seek reimbursement as additional rent from the tenant. You see those types of disputes from time to time. And a lot of this also depends on the size of the tenant. So if you're a grocery store, your leverage is going to be a little different than if you're a mom and pop in a small inline store in a shopping center. And especially if you're a mom and pop, typically commercial leases are longer than residential leases. So you'll usually see maybe a 5-year lease. And if you sign a 5-year lease, usually if you're a mom and pop, you'll have a personal guarantee. And if the business goes poorly and closes, then you're going to find your personal assets at risk. So these are things that you need to take in consideration in negotiating the terms of the lease.